Today on CityCast Madison. It's Tuesday, so that means it's time for another installment of Must See Madison. Do you love the silver screen? How about getting out to catch a good flick on a budget? Well, every Wednesday this month, you can see top quality award-winning films on the cheap at the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art. And Arts and Literature Laboratory is also hosting an event this month showcasing the avant-garde and experimental Ann Arbor Film Festival tour. To learn more about what's on deck and to get some background on the various local film series, we sat down with Jim Krell, Public Programs Coordinator for Arts and Literature Laboratory and programmer for Momoka Cinema. Plus, our own TV and film critic Rob Thomas, the voice behind our Madison Minutes newsletter. It's Tuesday, February 4th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Hi, Jim.
Hello.
Hello. And hi, Rob.
Hi, Bianca.
Our bona fide in-house film critic, our Madison Minutes newsletter writer, and you may also know him from his Substack, Not That Rob Thomas. We got a bunch of filmies on the podcast today. I don't really have any bona fides as an actual film critic, done some writing, but I think of myself as an armchair filmy. So to put it plainly, we're a bunch of film nerds and we're about to have some fun.
Bianca, when we see you at film festival screenings, we know we made the right choice, too.
Oh, that's very sweet, Jim. I am excited that you are on the podcast. This is your first time on and hope to have you back. You wear many film hats in and around Madison. You curate a number of series. How are you feeling about this February's lineup of movies to check out?
Yeah, I'm very excited. It's hard switching between hats sometimes, especially when it gets busy, like when the Momoka Cinema series starts. Usually at least one of those weeks I'll have a double duty of a Mills Folly on one night and a Momoka for another night in a given week, a particular week. But that's good. It's a good kind of busy. And I'm excited about the films and people responding to the films. And we had a really good Duck Soup Cinema a few weekends ago, and people were very generous with their comments about how they think that series is going and programming there. So it's an exciting time.
Jim, tell us about Duck Cinema.
Yeah, Duck Soup Cinema is a series that's been going on a long time at the Overture Center, and specifically in the Capitol Theater where the big Barton organ is. And it's been a series that dates back to, when I was in high school or even earlier. And it's a showcase for silent film, and also a showcase for that organ. It had live accompaniment by specialists who know the ins and outs and all the things that can be done on that Barton organ and are specialists in silent film accompaniment. So Jelani Eddington is one of them, and he did the most recent Duck Soup. And he does wonders with not only with the music, but also the sound effects that can be done with the Barton organ, like telephone rings and doorbells and sometimes dogs barking and other things. And it's really quite impressive what he's able to do. Yeah, and a lot of people come. It has a really big built-in audience. I think we had 500 tickets sold for the matinee and then another 400 for the evening. And we had Professor Leah Jacobs from the Com Arts Department, recently retired. She did a really wonderful introduction on Norma Talmadge, who was the star of the film Yes or No that we screened. And we're getting good feedback from people that they really like that kind of contextual information. And we're hoping to do more of that kind of stuff because we have, many early film specialists to draw from at the university and beyond. So, yeah, it's an exciting series.
Yeah, that's where I studied film, and I know Leah Jacobs, and that sounds like a really incredible night. And just in general, the program, talk about spicing up silent film, getting more people in for that. And Rob, we talked to you on the podcast about big movies happening in our big theaters, but our art cinema is just off the chain. And I know that you've actually been to the Duck Soup and I think you raved about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also been to Momoka Cinema. They have the Rooftop Cinema series in the summer. We get to go outside and see some challenging, unusual movies. And it's one of the things I really love about Madison is the work of people like Jim, who, frankly, trust audiences here that you can show something off the beaten path and they'll show up. And like you said, Jim, not just watch it, be interested in it, talk about it, learn about it. It really, I think, shows what a great movie town Madison is at all levels.
Yeah. So we talked about Duck Soup, which I definitely want to get a chance to go to. Are there any additional Duck Soups this month?
No, the last of the season will be in May, Saturday, May 3rd. The Dragon Painter, which was produced by Japanese-American actor who had some success in Hollywood, but was getting frustrated with the roles that he was being offered. So he started his own production company, Sasue Hayakawa. So that'll be good.
I mean, it's one thing I love about Duck Soup now is that I remember when it started, it was very well-known Chaplin films, Buster Keaton. And in the recent years, it's really showcasing all these silent movie artists who you wouldn't see their films otherwise, if not for series like this, especially in this fantastic presentation.
There's always new things being discovered and new restorations coming out, and it's sort of hard to keep track of all the new things that we could potentially show at Duck Soup. So we'll keep people up to date as we pursue those leads.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're on it. You're on the scene and you're doing the work for us. Let's talk about the Momoka Cinema series that, you've got multiple showings this month, all through February. What are the basics around that cinema series that folks should know?
Yeah, it's in the Momoka Auditorium on Wednesdays in February. And we've been experimenting with different types of lineups, sometimes introducing more experimental work into the proceedings. This time it's a mix of sort of art house film and documentary film. Some of the films are films that I've been hoping to catch up with myself. And then some of the films are things that, as a completist, I'm trying to see as many of a particular filmmaker's work as possible. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I got a chance to see a couple of them in advance. Ha, 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 ha. Everyone else who's listening definitely should. The ones I saw were incredible. But Jim, let's dive in. Tell us what's on deck for the Wednesdays series.
Right. So February 5th, it's A Traveler's Needs, which is the latest film from Hong Sang-soo, who is a South Korean filmmaker, very prolific. He makes so many films that when I booked this, I think this was the newest film available. And even since I booked it, there's another film that's more recent that's actually available now. I recently completed a film conversations class through Arts and Literature Laboratory, and we looked at his film Walk Up, which is a relatively recent film. So I'm excited to, carry through and see the latest from him. And he has worked a few times with the well-known French actress Isabelle Huppert. She stars in A Traveler's Needs. So I'm curious to see that sort of combination of his sensibility and her sensibility play out in that particular film.
So that one's up tomorrow, you guys.
And then the following week, Swamp Dogg gets his pool painted, about the musician who's known since 1970 as Swamp Dogg. He had an earlier career before that, but changed his stage name to Swamp Dogg in 1970. And it's a really interesting documentary. As you watch it, in a way, it almost plays out like, is this real? It's like there's so many interesting twists and turns to his career and to his life that it's. I ended up learning a lot about music of the era through the documentary.
Yeah, that's one that I got a chance to watch and was the most excited from the lineup because I've heard of Swamp Dogg. I've listened to his music, and I didn't hear about him until like the late 2010s. But I'm not going to lie, from the title, I'm like, what is this going to be about? Is this an art film that you just watch someone painting a pool? Because I hope that's not the case. Far from it. Like the first 30 seconds, I felt like I already have gotten my money's worth just watching the first 30 seconds. Someone in it calls him, quote, the official great-grandfather of West Coast hip-hop. That might be a superlative or like kind of a little bit of a stretch, but it was so compelling, this documentary. It was so artsy, and there's a lot of collage of like old family photos and old interviews, and then it just like is oozing style with funky music and funkadelic splashes. Like in terms of like, is this real? There is kind of the traditional biopic stuff, but with a total like artsy flair the whole time. And another quote I loved was from his daughter, where she calls it's basically, quote, the bachelor pad for aging musicians. So it's all taking place at like this creative house of like older musicians. And at one point, it just feels like you're sitting on the porch listening to some old heads chatting it up about the tale of one man's life. And at one point, one of the guys, Shorty, like falls asleep while they're, and then the documentary gets deep and they talk about what it was like for him to be on the music circuit in segregated US, and his mental health. So it has everything. 17 stars.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then it gets into the nuts and bolts economics of like how he was able to, create a record label and put out like early rap artists before they were picked up by more mainstream labels. And it's wide ranging in its topics, and it's pretty interesting. And there's some good music in it too. We've been trying to do more music themed documentaries, at least one per series, because I think there's a lot of interest in that. But at the same time, it's not a conventional documentary by any means. It uses a wide range of techniques and styles, certainly not the conventional, I'm just going to observe the subject and not interfere at all. There's a lot of seemingly staged scenes even, but it still has the emotional truth or the, deeper truth about his life. So it's not like you think anything's fake.
Yeah. The documentary itself is almost a character. Like the documentary is alive and popping. So great pick.
Well, thank you. Oh, and then one thing I don't think I told you leading up to it is Deborah McClutchy, a friend of mine who was an undergrad here at UW. She was the archival producer. So
local roots.
Yeah, I have to talk to her about that because, man, there's a lot of sources, drawn from like seemingly public access material and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah.
And she was nominated for an Oscar last year. Am I right about that?
Yes, and that's the same Deb who was nominated for an Oscar last year. So, good to see her doing good work out there.
Two more, right? I know I'm kind of jumping out of order, but there's another music documentary.
Right, yeah. So the series ends February 26th with Let's Get Lost, which, as I mentioned, sometimes we try to do restorations or, older films that are newly available again. So that's a documentary on the jazz trumpeter Chet Baker, came out in 1988, filmed by the well-known fashion photographer Bruce Weber. I'm getting a lot of good response from that pick. I think people are interested in revisiting that film.
For folks who love Chet Baker's music, like I do, it's really awesome to see him in such an intimate way. It's a documentary about someone's life, but it's not just like the super staged sort of documentary we see today for the interviews. Like it's very intimate, and it feels like you're sitting right next to him while he's just telling his memories in a very casual way. And it gave me some like French New Wave vibes, the cinematography. I love that. It reminded me of Elevator to the Gallows, the Louis Malle film, where it's just like Miles Davis is playing his jazz music over the scenes and they wash over you. And yeah, that one is really cool.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited to share that and let people revisit it if they've seen it before or see it for the first time. It's one that people don't really talk about that much anymore, so I'm glad it's getting some recent notice. And then the second to last film, February 19th, Viet and Nam, a Vietnamese film about two coal workers who are also secretly lovers, and one of them has to find the remains of their father. And so that's the central plot point of it, but it's a film this is the one film that I know the least about going into it, but the film made the John Waters' top 10 list for the year. He always does a particularly eccentric list of top 10 films of the year for Vulture and Artforum magazine. And so we were lucky to get that. It's a relatively new release.
Well, that's an incredible lineup for the Momoka series. So that's every Wednesday, which is really exciting. And we had mentioned at the beginning, you wear many hats, right? So you're doing the curation at Momoka. You also do curation for a series called Mills Folly Microcinema with Art and Lit Lab. Y'all are located on Livingston Street, right by the Sylvie venue off of East Wash. Tell us about that series before we kind of hear about what's on deck in February.
Yeah, the Mills Folly Microcinema series is a monthly experimental film series. So every month we draw from the national film festival circuit or regional filmmakers or sometimes local filmmakers making more abstract work, or if there are narratives, it's sort of unconventional narratives and, sort of hybrid documentaries, but filmmakers working in the experimental tradition. And what's coming up in February will be the touring festival for the Ann Arbor Film Festival, the touring package, the touring program. And our Ann Arbor Film Festival is the oldest experimental film festival in North America. So they're gonna have their 63rd this year. This will be the package from the 62nd annual Ann Arbor Film Festival. And it's always a mix of obviously experimental films, but also animated films and short documentaries. And it's always an interesting package. So I'm looking forward to sharing that as well. And then beyond that, we're communicating with filmmakers in Chicago and Milwaukee and trying to have more networking between experimental filmmakers in the region. We're planning on doing another live music, live video event in April. So mixing music with live video mixed visuals. And also every 6 months, we do something called Project Projection, which is an opportunity for local filmmakers and video makers to show their work. So every 6 months, it's as close to an open mic for filmmaking as we can get. We do look at the films before we show them, so it's not completely like an open mic, but people can submit films and there's no submission fee, and we try to show everything that we can.
I have definitely been to the last one that you mentioned, and it's
Right.
it's very eclectic, and it's kind of like a grab bag. You don't know what you're going to get, but it's fun and you're entertained. And I just love the local component and people coming together that are super interested in film, and even filmmakers themselves, and the networking I've seen it all go down, and it's really wonderful.
Jim, has the Madison kind of movie scene always been like that, where it's been very supportive of experimental work and also producing experimental work and coming together like that? Or is that something you've seen build over the years here?
I think it's gone in waves. I think obviously with the university here, there are opportunities to see sort of classic experimental films in history classes, film history classes, and so forth. Before he retired, J.J. Murphy, who was teaching production at the UW, his earliest films, his well-known early films were experimental films. And there were groups like when I was an undergrad, there's the group, the Filmmakers Collaborative, that facilitated similar shows to what we do with Project Projection, that we had open film and video screenings every semester to encourage people to just continue to make stuff. But like anything, it sort of goes in waves, and sometimes people move away and then that whole infrastructure has to be rebuilt. So that's what I'm hoping to do with the ongoing Project Projection series, so that there's a consistency there and people will know like every 6 months there's an opportunity to show something.
Well, it feels like we've gone from Momoka series, which is like kind of more known films, maybe a little bit, and then maybe more common, but has some like artsy twists and turns. And then for the Mills Folly microcinema, like it even gets more experimental. Certainly, talking about the Ann Arbor Film Festival that folks can check out this month, which is really exciting. Jim, how do you go about picking or curating these films for these series? Do you try and balance a variety of genres? Like what's going through your mind when you're making these choices?
It's a mix. Some of it is just simply driven by, I want to see that, and if we don't bring it in, then it won't be screened, So that's, one motivation. In terms of Amoka, there's some broad things that we've been trying to do consistently, like having a music documentary or a music themed film each time. I'd like to do more, especially with the rooftop cinema, more anime and animation, because I'm discovering that there's definitely an interest in that for the series. But other than that, it's a mix of trying to keep on top of what's going on in the festival circuit or the microcinema circuit. So, when we call it Mills Folly Microcinema, there's sort of a whole network of similar venues of smaller venues either associated with museums or sometimes just associated with different kind of creative art spaces that aren't necessarily built for film screenings and cinema screenings, but they use makeshift projectors and screens just to make things happen in the particular towns that they're in. So, keeping up on what the microcinema circuit is up to, and the film festival circuit, and just trying to anticipate what might not make it here unless someone goes after it. I think the Vietnam would be a good example of that. I don't know if that, I mean, it certainly could have played the Cinematheque and maybe somewhere on campus, but sometimes it's worth making sure that it comes to town by making it happen yourself.
Well, this question is for both of y'all, because obviously this is happening at an art museum, art and lit lab. It's an artsy space. What do you say to folks who maybe have not ventured into the wild and wacky world of art and experimental cinema, like what the appeal is and sort of the mindset around going and what draws you?
I mean, I would say it's a lot more fun than you might think by the term art film or experimental film. I think, Art Lit Lab is just a fun space, period. I mean, it's just a fun place to hang around in and see the art and see music and see film. So I think that's a very nice entry point. And, Jim and other programmers in town, I think really make a point to program things that are accessible. And sometimes that's the first thing you see. And then you come back next week for something that's, maybe a little more challenging. Like I talked about Rooftop in the summer. That's just a beautiful place to be. And then also you get to see this incredible movie. So it's not scary. I promise you, it's not scary to go see these films. You'll love them.
Yeah, and some of the experimental work uses sort of, visual techniques or visual language that people aren't used to. But the more you see, the more you understand how they work. So you'll never learn how to watch them unless you watch them. So you just have to sort of dive in and anticipate that there might be a little difficulty early on, but the rewards are great when you're willing to put the time in. And it's not like you have to take a class to understand them. It's not that. It's just that you have to watch them. You have to expose yourself to them and be open to them and let the images work the way that they're working rather than impose, what you expect out of a movie.
Let yourself be expanded.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like every time I go to an art film or an experimental film, I do feel like my brain is getting a fun exercise sometimes, and it feels like I'm expanding, like I can start looking at something different. It's the same thing, going and experiencing art in other formats. But I know, having worked at MoMoCA, some people, they're like, oh, contemporary art, it's not for me. Experimental things, I do want to bust that myth. It's not just for a certain type of person. It really is fun for so many folks. And I would say that we're all kind of part of the filmy scene in Madison. Of course, I started out saying that. I do want to ask, what are y'all's favorite part about the Madison film going scene? Because I think we have a really strong one. Is this an adventurous town for film fans?
It's an interesting question because it is and it isn't. Certainly the core film fans who you see at multiple screenings throughout the film festival in the spring,
Rob.
or
Bianca.
There's some people who you can sort of expect will show up at particular screenings. Their kind of support is great and ongoing and unwavering. But Madison does have an interesting history in terms of the commercial side of support for that kind of film. I mean, since the film festival started, there have been 2 or 3 or 4 attempts to do an art house screen, an art house cinema. And what you found was people would show up at the film festival for a film, but then the same film would play in town later and people wouldn't show up for regular theatrical engagements. What to do about that, I don't know, but it is an issue that in terms of sustaining the market for these types of films, people have to, again, have to take the plunge and go out and see them when they have the opportunity to do so, because they don't have to come here. They can make their money elsewhere if people aren't going to them here.
So from where you're sitting, you want more people to go out. You're like, let's make this more robust of a scene.
Yeah, I think when the tide comes in, all the boats rise. So even when, say, although we're now avoiding this, when there were schedule conflicts between MoMoCA and Cinematheque for a particular series and particular screenings, my take on it is, I don't care who you go to, just go. Get out of the house and go to see a film. And that is to all of our benefit to get people more in the habit of going out of the house and experiencing the social part of film going. And I guess that's, to get a more direct answer to your question, I think that's the really rewarding part of the film scene here, is that there's a great feeling when you can share the film with people who appreciate it, and that social aspect of it you don't get when you're just streaming at home.
Mm-hmm. Facts.
Yeah. And we've talked about, the challenge of having no quote unquote regular movie theaters in downtown Madison. So it's just hard to sustain that past the festival, which is why it makes things like what Jim does so important to Madison, I think, because it really fills that void for social filmmaking and, the social act of filmmaking, and for people coming together to enjoy these films. But it's a challenge because it's a very fragmented market right now. And it's, you want to sustain that.
Well, if you show up, you get rewarded.
That's right.
And it's not very expensive, very accessible. And, we've mentioned it a couple times, but the summer rooftop series at MMOCA is also fire. So we're going to have to talk about that once we get closer to. I'm excited to hear that that's still happening. And Jim, you'll still be in charge of that?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, we've got a great roster for February, and we're going to keeping track of what's going on and getting our butts in those seats. We love it. We hope y'all listening love it. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to future conversations. I look forward to seeing you in the seats, either at the MMOCA or Mills Folly or the festival that's coming up faster than we realize.
Catch me in front of the silver screen. And Rob, thank you so much.
Thanks, Bianca.
That's Jim Krell, Public Programs Coordinator for Arts and Literature Laboratory and Programmer for MMOCA Cinema Series. And Rob Thomas, our Madison Minutes newsletter editor and film critic at the Not That Rob Thomas Substack. If you want to learn more about MMOCA's screenings and Art Lit Lab's Mills Folly Microcinema event this month, head to our show notes for links. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with a filmie? Someone whose letterboxd is up to date. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, may the force be with you.